I've been at 3 of these conferences. And this is the first time I presented. I finally felt an obligation. One of the reasons I took so long is that there is a curious climate. It's a strange combination. It's a combination of erudition and humility. And I didn't know where I fit in. I was reminded, looking at the roster of people for this one, of some years ago when I see the erudition and the scholarship around me. I was reminded of a dear friend, James Feely, landscape architect, city planner, who had studied under McHarg at Yale while I studied under Lou Kahn. And when he went back to Ireland, I wrote to him about a series of works by great architects all over America and elsewhere. And Jim wrote back to me and said, they're all great men. They happen to be all men at this time. They're all great men. And here am I, he said, trying to put 2x4s together. Well, that's what I feel here. I begin with a little quote. D.H. Lawrence, in his 1928 introduction to the short stories of Verga, it was called Cavalleria Rusticana, he wrote, "A great deal of the meaning of life and of art lies in the apparently dull spaces, the pauses, the unimportant passages." In this essay, I'll discuss 2 built works that deal with the issue of transition between the sacred and the secular. It's a little bit of history, really, but history in somewhere an in-between realm. The 2 projects are the Millennial Project at London's Southwark Cathedral. That's an urban solution. And a parish complex of St. Jude Church in Boca Raton, Florida, which offers a suburban approach. I just discovered the Southwark Project this time last year, just about this time last year, when I was wandering around London and stumbled on it. And I said, I must do some more about this. I use in the title is Transcending Boundaries, Geometry in the Service of the Sacred. That's easy to misunderstand. I use the word geometry in its basic Euclidean sense of giving measurable order to the places we inhabit. It's far removed from the sophistication of, say, Corb's modular or Peter Eisenman's design for the Church of the year 2000, which has this wonderful series of liquid crystals, as he calls them, with the congregation in one set on one side of the road of a passage and the sanctuary on the other side, supposed to be communicating. Very strange Peter Eisenman approach. I'm not going there. I use the term sacred from the viewpoint that a place is made sacred primarily by what happens within, by what goes on there, rather than by consecration or symbolic form. Sacred event evokes sacred place and gives rise to sacred space, sacred form. Sacred places like Notre Dame de Paris or St. Patrick's in New York, they are indeed places apart. There are temenoses or temenoi, but they open too abruptly off the street, offering no degrees of inwardness, as I call it, merely a quick hop, a quick jump from the profane to the sacred. And there's a need for something in between. I'm still mindful, after 50 years, of the impact of Lou Kahn's notion of spaces that serve and spaces that are served. One can think of transitions as servant spaces, but less static than in, for example, Lou Kahn's Trenton bathhouse. I felt humbled by Nader's quotation of my favorite Lou Kahn statement. At about the same time as Kahn was conceiving this notion, Aldo van Eyck posited the importance of the in-between realm in architecture. His Wheels of Heaven design for a Roman Catholic church reflected both his architectural conviction and his notion that there, the Roman Catholic liturgical story needs to be loosened up. He said, on the other hand, the Protestants have no story, they need to be sharpened up. So we had a great argument over that. J.B. Jackson's journal Landscape in 1962 published the pioneering manifesto toward making places. It stressed, among other ideas, the role of boundaries as places of transition rather than separation. Harvey Cox, in The Feast of Fools, which is somewhere between the secular city and the future of faith, says Christianity does not share a sense of comedy with other traditions, or does share a sense of comedy with other traditions, but its grounds are different. Instead of one world of shadow and deception, it affirms two real-world ages, the passing one and the coming one, neither of which should be seen without reference to the other or taken with full seriousness on its own. We live in between. My two subject projects are set in places whose reality smacks of the comic. Southwark, in the time of Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, was the bawdiest area in London. Even today, we find the ludicrous juxtaposition of the once dominant cathedral, which there, with such things as pianos, Ranzo pianos, towering shard of glass, and other newcomers such as the Disney-like replica of Admiral Drake's Golden Hind. They are all appearing there. Boca Raton, equally comic, is a suburb trying to be a city, home to high-tech corporate headquarters, golf courses, Hispanic culture, and snowbirds wintering in the mouth of the rat. This 13th, by the way, the architect for the project at Southwark is Richard Griffiths. You haven't heard of him? Richard Griffiths, a great architect. The 13th century London Church of St. Mary Overy, which means over the river, was sited on low, marshy ground next to the River Thames. During Shakespeare's time at the Globe Theatre, the area had bear baiting, dog fighting, brothels, and dubious taverns. In 1538, it was renamed St. Saviour's. And by the late 19th century, it had fallen into great disrepair, and the nave had reached this area here. You see it bending even in the 15th century when this was done. The nave had reached a state of imminent collapse by the 19th century. So they called in the renowned Arthur Blomfield. He was asked to restore the church and extend the nave. Not only did he repair and restore the building between 1890 and 1897, but he amplified its Gothic grandeur, and it became a cathedral in 1905. This is an important time because I left out what I was going to say, and it doesn't matter. By the 20th century, the cathedral was surrounded by a densely packed cityscape of warehouses served by narrow alleyways, as wretched as Dickens knew it when he wrote The Old Curiosity Shop. Overy was probably the Londoner's equivalent of the American term, the wrong side of the tracks. By mid-century, it was hemmed in by commercial, marine, industrial, and railway structures. The river was blocked from view. Now, this photograph, back. This photograph is at a time, too bad, I just blew it, I think. Oh, no, I'm all right, I'm okay, thank you. The river was blocked from view, but not in this photograph, which is fairly recent. It's taken from the shard up above. How ironic that the cathedral, in this awful setting, should have a chapel named for John Harvard, founder of the great university, who was baptized right there. That's the chapel. By the late 20th century, the growth of South Bank cultural facilities west from the Royal Festival Hall included important works like Norman Foster's, we messed this up, don't we? Like Norman Foster's City Hall. The Tate Modern is back up here. Down here, there's a new bridge by Calatrava, and so on. The Tate Modern was formerly a power station. There's also Sam Wanamaker's restoration of the Globe Theatre further down. And across the street from the cathedral, the London Bridge tube station. Other structures added to this incursion. In 1984, Ronald Sims, the architect, added a new chapter house, this hexagonal series here, to the cathedral, chapter house and refectory and offices, with a connection through one of the doors, two of the doors of the cathedral. It presented, however, a challenge to the next architect. As the millennium approached, a visionary dean, Colin Slee, commissioned the architect of the fabric, Richard Griffiths, to plan and design expanded facilities beyond the liturgical and parochial to reach out to a projected increase of casual visitors. Richard's extension here shows the existing Ron Sims building. Back again, please. The existing Ron Sims building, but all of this has changed. And what Richard has done has created a square and a street. A glass-roofed indoor street, which marks the site of an historic laneway. They have taken over what they call Montague chambers, lawyers' chambers, old, and they've turned this into the office. A linked building of meeting rooms and chapter room are here. Library and refectory are here. This is the north side of the cathedral. Thus it opens, it separates and connects the cathedral from the new buildings. The lane opens to the neighborhood at both ways, and the major access here through the square, which is planted on this side, built on that side, opens to yet another space and another space leading to the river. This gives an idea of, if you can see it, just here are the hexagonal Ronald Sims, and here are the link buildings, the new buildings, and the cathedral itself. The transitional structures under Griffith's handling have a strong and serene character. The immediate elements are proportional to human movement. Scale, light, and geometry form a series of graceful transitions all the way from the quiet cathedral interior and its monumental exterior to the vibrant life of London and the Thames bankside. The cafe, built on the site of a medieval refectory, gives onto this Millennium Courtyard, as it's called, where one has outdoor dining. This in turn opens through a pillared gateway to Montague Close, leading to the chambers, and to a new space across the river, which is marked by a grid of plane trees. And so the cathedral is connected by stages through the street, through the court, through the close, to another court, to the river, and to all the traffic. The indoor street poses a 19th century wall to a 20th century wall. The latter articulated with vertical rectangular openings in rhythmic proportions of 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 1 to 4, 4 to 8, and so on. Very simple geometry. The wall at the east end, on the other hand, is a more somber geometry. This is a 21st century wall facing a 13th century wall, and has a more somber geometry with paired buttresses. I'll learn to use this thing soon. Paired buttresses and horizontal rectilinear windows above, giving a whole different approach to the centers of administration and scholarship. A subtle modular order of the buttresses mark a gentle, measured procession, a gently paced procession. Each end of the street, as I said, opened up to the neighborhood, and Montague Close, for instance, has the Mudlark, a pub. You have to have a pub, a traditional pub, near any space in England. Historic references abound. Doesn't it work? Yes, it does. 16th century kiln and pottery has been excavated and left permanently exposed as a kind of link with the origin of this street. In the refectory, the cafe, which opens onto the courtyard, there's a decided Roman reference to the original settlements here. The arch, the deep terracotta arches, really reminiscent and evocative of Ostia Antica and some of the villas there from the 4th century. Outside in the courtyard, the buttresses, alternatively paired and single, add visual strength to the exterior walls, but very simply. The facade openings alternate between rectangles of modest size and larger arched windows that are counterpoint to the rhythm of the upper windows of the cathedral. It's all in service of scaling the geometry of the cathedral down to the domestic level and human scale of the transitional space. The entire precinct, including the re-landscaped, quiet southern garden, is a place of peace and refuge. The library and refectory wing, it has this peculiar protrusion which lightens up and gives a sense of humor to the more sober geometry of the facade. This provides shelter. The series of buildings, low to tall, all the way around, provides shelter from the winds from diners or those who wish to study in the nooks between the hedges here. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Wow. I better go fast. Oops, sorry. I was going to ask you to warn me when it was 10, but... Oh, dear. Well, the next project is a church and school built in 1983, 79 to 83. The architect, by the way, was yours truly. Apologies for that. No apologies for that. It includes a school, meeting places, a church, and a contemplative chapel. The tower there is not a bell tower or anything else. It's simply a ventilation. The sustainability of this building I could go into, but that's not our subject now. The double roofs and so on. It makes a great difference. There. Whereas the Southwark Millennium Project involved in opening an historic sacred place to the life of the city, the Boca Raton project does the seemingly impossible, the opposite, offering successive degrees of inward access to a brand new one. The realization here is, again, a street and a square with fountains, smaller square, an indoor street beyond a baptistry which is on an axis with this node here, an exterior octagonal fountain with an octagonal baptistry, little chapel beyond, and a street wandering around and finally leading to the center. The geometry of this is simply a 12-inch module, in which this is 48 by 48, 24 by 48, and this is 12 feet all around, as this is 12 by 12, and so on. I discovered that the geometry of Griffith's project in Southwark, and he just wrote this to me yesterday, is also, it's 3.6 meters, which is just about exactly 12. I'll take you very briefly through, so without further discussion. The outdoor street, which ends at the node of the fountain. Oh, one other thing I should explain is one can touch everything, the eaves, the roof, everything is tangible until one gets inside. Even the baptistry is tangible. One turns from the chapel into the indoor street, which echoes the outdoor street, with 9 stained glass windows. The theme is the tree of life with outdoor vegetation interfering with the tree. And we come to the apse, turn left into a much higher space, which is surmounted around the altar by a great corona of light. There's a corona, a recessed opening, which is open to rear screen projection for video and so on, and film, a circle of vision. And up here we have a circle of sound projecting. And above it, we have the ventilation, a circle of ventilation, if you wish, or of air. Can't get back here. And I conclude by saying the modern reredos, remember everything was tangible, human scale until we come into this point. The modern reredos is an abstract geometric ordering of planes and circles. I mentioned the 4 circles. Occasionally there's a circle cast from the east window, which makes a 4th circle on the floor here during Mass. The geometric abstraction of these utilitarian elements generates an interior monumentality that transcends the physical tangibility of the outer structures. It's the opposite of Richard's. Geometry, scale, and materials evolve towards more abstract forms that, coupled with the loftier space, emphasize the mystical nature of Eucharistic liturgy. To sum up, the 2 examples, one urban English, one suburban American, illustrate that geometry, scale, and material detail carefully and modestly disciplined, can serve to modulate the transitions between the most sacred inner realms and the busting reality of the world outside. But there are some questions arise. The concept is not necessarily applicable to churches or to religious spaces. The question is, A, whether it's applicable, the idea of this modulated shift in scale, size, and so on, through simple geometry, is applicable to all religious spaces, to all urban spaces where human involvement is concerned. Thank you very much.